to wiggle between his toes. Isn't it written, the laborer is worthy of his wage and the hopper of his clod? If it isn't, I'll write it now. Oh, I'm the clodhopper who makes the tall corn grow, the artist who smears dignity through the speckled cotton patch. I'm the man who fills the belly of the world and slips a petticoat over her nakedness. That's just one sample of these. My dad died young. I wrote a poem at his funeral. I was given a poetry reading day before yesterday at Hampton, West Virginia, to the Elderly Club. And somebody asked me if I was a member of the Elderly Club, and I said, you know, I never had thought about being elderly. My grandpa lived to be 102, and my mother's 194, and I'm just 75. I never had thought of myself as being in that category. So here's a thing called funeral notes. That was my dad's funeral. Well, I'll tell about it here. We're burying part of him today in Hickory Grove churchyard. We can't put him all here, for his grave spreads over a few rocky acres that he loved, where peach blossoms bloom and cotton stalks speckle the ground on a Georgia hill. 40 years he's been digging and plowing himself under along these cotton rows. Most of my dad is there, where the grass grows and cockleburs bristle, now that he's gone. We're covering him in springtime, when seeds sprout. And I think next autumn, at picking time, the white speckled stalks will be my old dad bursting out. And then, if I have time here, I worked with the migrant farm workers from the Rio Grande Valley up through the Midwest to different Minnesota, Michigan, Iowa, and so on years ago. And I wrote a bunch of poems. My poems come out of the hurt and the struggle and the pain of poor people. And I saw a lot of that. I saw a hungry child, is the title of this poem. I saw a hungry child in Texas, and its eyes held more tales than I can ever write. Who knows how it feels to see a hungry child? Who knows better than the mother of the child I saw? And who knows how it feels to be hungry? Who knows better than the child itself? America, why don't you ask? You're big and overstuffed with good things. Why don't you ask? Why don't you say, hey, kid, how does it feel to have an empty belly? How does it feel to gnaw a moldy crust and sleep on old gunny sacks? Does the belly get to be a mighty big thing, kid, when it's empty? Why don't you ask, America? Let me just finish with one little thing here called Anger in the Land. This poem came back before the civil rights movement in this country. 1950, I was driving across the state of Georgia, and I picked up a black hitchhiker, and he told me a story. As we rode along, he said, you know, we were crossing the Chattahoochee River, and he said, I used to live down the river. When I was 9 years old, my older brother was lynched, and when the lynchers finished the job, they cut the rope, dragged the body, and threw it on my mother's doorsteps. And you know that he said it just, he didn't say it in a bombastic way, very quiet, but I could feel the pent-up anger in the man as he told the story to me. And that night I wrote this thing called Anger in the Land, before Martin Luther King had ever come on the scene, and so on. And I think you can, this poem, incidentally, has been set to music. I'm not going to sing it, I'll just read it. Our daughter happens to be a musician, Hetty West, and she's set this one and others to music. It's been on a lot of albums. Peter, Paul, and Mary, Pete Seeger, and others have had it on in their singing and so on. Oh, there's grieving in the plum grove, and there's weeping in the weeds. There's sorrow in the shanty, where a broken body bleeds. For there's been another lynching, and another grain of sand swells the mountain of resentment. Oh, there's anger in the land. And the woman broods in silence close beside an open door. Flung across the flimsy doorsteps lies a corpse upon the floor. You'll not ask me why I'm silent. Thus the woman spoke to me. Her two eyes blazed with anger, and her throat throbbed agony. Let the wind go crying yonder in the treetops by the spring. Let its voice be soft and feeling like it was a living thing. Once my heart could cry in sorrow. Now it lies there on the floor, in the ashes by the hearthstone. They can't hurt it anymore. Did you ever see a lynching? Ever see a frenzied mob mill around a swaying body when it done the hellish job? Oh, there's grieving in the plum grove, and there's weeping in the weeds. There's sorrow in the shanty where a broken body bleeds. Well, thank you. I think my time is up.
All right, now we're going to have time for some questions. Again, we'd like to ask you to come up to the mics as you address the questions to any of our three speakers. Questions or comments that you want to make.
Gentleman over here wants to know where we can get one of those books to Mr. West. We'd like that last poem particularly.
Oh, the last one. I have a little pamphlet here. I have had three of my books. I've given them all away that I had here. I think some of my books are on the table out there outside, but if you want this little pamphlet, you'd be welcome. It's called this pamphlet is called A Time for Anger. A Time for Anger. I'd be glad to give you this one.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to address Don West, and I would like for you to tell us a little bit about the sorts of things that you teach in your school. I've read a little bit about it, and I believe I remember reading something like you didn't teach quilting. You were trying to teach more about the real history of the young people that were there, and so I'd like to hear a little bit about what you do teach.
Well, I wouldn't say that we don't teach. We have, well, let me say this. There's been, in recent times, there's been a great deal of discovery of Appalachia. We've been discovered again, as I say. I had a pamphlet a few years ago called Romantic Appalachia, or Poverty Pays If You Ain't Poor. And this was a takeoff on the way. So many people come into Appalachia and all they see is the kind of things that, what's that place down in Georgia puts out? Well, it's the quaint, it's the picturesque, it's the romantic. See, we have these nice old ladies that make the quilts, and we sell a lot of those quilts for our ladies. And we have the ox yokes, and we have the weaving looms and all that kind of thing. And that's about all they see. They don't see the poverty of the people. They don't see the struggle. They don't see the history, the tradition that we have had there in the mountains. And this is what we're concerned about. We're concerned to help them to get into a real understanding of their own cultural heritage, because our people have been hillbillyized, as I say, for so long that sometimes our young people get a negative self-image. They get to seeing themselves as, no good. And your self-image is so important. So we try to teach our kids about the real heritage there, about our heroes. And I could go on for hours talking about our heroes that we have there. Men and women that ought to be known, that not known at all. We've had in West Virginia, for example, and all over the Appalachian South, we've had terrific struggles with terrific people coming into leadership. Some of them have been shot down in cold blood. We had a battle at Blair Mountain back in 1921 when 10,000 coal miners were in opposition. I mean, they were in armed formation, fighting the coal bosses from Logan. And there were 21 airplanes up in the air, dropping bombs on them. And we've had lots of that kind of thing. Cabin Creek, Paint Creek, Mother Jones, Mother Blizzard, women, activities of women, it's just full of it. But our history book, West Virginia history book, uses the word union in connection with Union Carbide Corporation.
Okay. I'd like to ask David a question. I'd like, Dave, if you could, to explain a little more about Big Business Day and what you're planning on April 17th.
Well, I have some pamphlets that I came to give out here. This is a coalition of consumer, a few religious people, so-called, and I would say the cream of the younger crop of the labor leaders, their assistants. Nader, Galbraith, Frazier, Patsy Mink, James Farmer are the VIPs at the top. Then some of us are way down at the bottom in terms of actually done the work. There are going to be demonstrations in 150 cities in the United States. We're choosing 10 corporations that are particularly bad in regard to labor relations, pollution, bribery abroad, and other distinctions like that. This is a copy of the Case for Corporate Democracy Act, which Senator Metzenbaum of Ohio has already put into the Senate, and Rosenthal of New York has put into the House, along with a lot of other sponsors. So we're not just raising hell for the sake of raising hell, it's within a structure. Now, the thing that impresses me as a person of 62 is the list of the younger labor leaders that have pushed the AFL-CIO into this alliance. The AFL-CIO officially, in its meeting down in January in Florida, endorsed it. Not as enthusiastically as some of us wanted, but it's enthusiastic nevertheless. We hope that out of this movement there will be a permanent organization for, I would say, basic corporate control and basic corporate reform, I should say, to be more exact. I have some free pamphlets. We need your allegiance. And finally, my denomination, I'm very proud of it because this was a lot of blood on the floor as a result of this, is putting out, it came off the press this week, the Big Business Reader, which is 650 pages of facts and figures and non-illusions about the status of big business in the country. It's $4.95. If you want it, see me after, and I'll see that you get it. It's an excellent book, way below the price. Our own denomination put up $30,000 front money to make this possible. And I'm very proud of UCC, despite other things. This is a pamphlet by the Chamber of Commerce saying how bad we are, and maybe it's a complimentary copy that they sent us. And this is a organizer's manual. We're having 150 cities are having various things to happen, and the thing that encourages me mostly are the young labor guys that I see that got behind this. This was an idea in somebody's head a year ago and has now emerged into something. We have roughly 15 people on the staff, many of them loaned by the UAW. The head of our staff is the J.P. Stevens organizer for the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union, my old union. He's the New England director. He's now running the staff. And we hope out of this will come a permanent move toward corporate reform.
Okay. We'll go here and then here, okay?
Yeah, I'd like to hear Don West talk about country music a little bit. I know that Highlander School has had some fine musicians, you know, his daughter being one of them. And I know that there's at least two different traditions of country music that come from the South, and one being the Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and Loretta Lynn tradition, and another is perhaps the more folk tradition that Dick Don's daughter has been associated with. But I guess I'd just like to hear you talk about that a bit.
Well, I was sort of irked a little recently when I read an application of somebody from a bunch from New York. They were applying to the National Endowment for the Arts for a grant to take mountain music down to the mountain people, and it said in the application that unfortunately the mountain people never got to hear good traditional music, you know, down in Appalachia. We have at our center each year, we've had for the last 14 years, we've had a folk music festival, arts and crafts and so on. While we teach, as someone asked a question a while ago, what we teach. We teach all these other things. We don't neglect the music. We do have music every year. We have up to 25,000 people with us for a weekend. We have acres and acres to park on. We have 4 outdoor stages, and we have other inside buildings and so on. So we have workshops in folk music. We stick pretty strictly to folk, and traditional music and to topical music about the struggle, such songs as "Which Side Are You On," you know, and the song that came out of the struggle of the people. I myself wrote a book years ago that had lots of songs from Southern workers in it, and we are not in the Nashville tradition at all. We don't. Well, there are good musicians in Nashville, of course, but we had one year, there was a Hollywood concern that wanted to bring Johnny Cash down to our festival and make a movie. And I told them that I thought this would be sort of out of harmony with what we are trying to do. We bring in native folk musicians. We're going to have this summer, we're going to have a 2 weeks workshop in music. And it will take in all kinds of topical music, folk music, and so on. But we will stay within that area. We don't condemn others. Just like when I write poetry, I try to write it very plain and simple and clear to the point. But I don't condemn people who are trying to be abstract and write cute things for other poets. I'm not writing for other poets. I'm writing for people. And incidentally, I was pleased a few years ago when one of my books, my publisher said, sold more copies than any other book of American poetry except Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And I've been glad that it's possible for people to respond in this way.
Okay, next, over here.
I had a question about, well, I guess most of my experience has been with churches. The higher you go in the hierarchy, the more liberal folks are. I had a question for any of the three panelists about what they see as ways they can get some of the actions or some of the programs that people on the national level endorse, whether it's supporting the farm workers or whether it's pastorals about the land or whatever. How can they, how they see people within the church structures really taking that out to the churches? Because I don't, in most of my dealings with people in the church levels, I think a lot of times they don't really see, why the people on the national level of their denominations are donating money or supporting different causes.
Well, I would say, first of all, most church officials come from the upper middle class. They don't know how to talk to cotton people, to textile workers, and to miners. Their language. I recently had a meeting of some labor unions in New York City with some good people from the National Council. They were talking by each other, and yet the National Council people were way, way to the left. But I got Vic Gottbaum and some of the AFSCME people together, and they were talking different, Local 1199 in New York City, one of the best unions, hospital workers. I think there has to be, in terms of the long run, the church leadership have to come from the bottom. There's a great suspicion of church leadership by conservative churchmen that, as you said so well, do not understand why we take a position on Nestle or other things like that. I think, secondly, that the churches have trimmed their sails since 1968 in a very conscious way in order to fit what they would call the tide of conservatism beneath. I think they misinterpret what's really beneath. I think, finally, I think that those of us in social movements in the church lack a very sound biblical base. I preach to two Germanic, ancient, elderly, struggling churches. We're just getting blacks and Hispanics to join us. They understand the biblical basis for social action and social concern. If it's put in biblical terminology, if there's references that are clear parallels, if you explain the fact that Jesus was on the side of the poor, by gosh, you got to document it and not just say it's a good idea. Everybody knows this is true. I think there's a lack of a sound theological base, and this is why I'm so encouraged about Sojourners, because they come from a thorough biblical grounding and not from the point of view of just being sort of a social liberal and a do-gooder. I think finally that I think in my own life I was very much affected by Jack McMichael and Harry Ward and a few other people at Union Seminary. My wife and I was completing my second year in Union, and Jack McMichael, who was then a graduate instructor, Harry Ward and other people, helped me realize how far I was from the roots of the people. And therefore, I went out, asked my denomination to assign me to work with migrant workers, and between the second and third years of seminary. I also worked with minors for a summer when I was a sophomore in college. And it affected my whole life and my whole point of view. And I think that people have to be exposed to the other side of the tracks fairly early in their lives if they can really understand the struggle that's underneath. And if they rise to the hierarchy, they speak of their past, and their roots are deep, and not just from the point of view of something ought to be done.
I'd like to just add a word. I'm also an ordained minister in the same church that Dave, and I have pastored churches in the Congregational Church. But we publish, we have a printing plant at our place, and we published just recently this little booklet called Gospel Millions. It would sort of fit in with what the brother was thinking back there. This is an accounting, a very carefully researched accounting of the Oral Roberts, the Garner Ted Armstrongs, and this type of TV evangelist. They bring, well, Oral Roberts gets $55 million a year, Ted Armstrong gets $75 million a year, and so on and so forth. This is the kind of thing that is paving the way potentially for fascism. They're even talking about a Christian party that would put Christians in office, and we'd take over, the Christians would, the born-again Christians would take over the government. So this I'm very much concerned about. But there are other, as David pointed out, sojourners. I agree 100% on that. We think a lot of that magazine and those people. But I have known in my own experiences, I've known people in this same evangelistic type of fundamentalism that also had something down to earth as far as human welfare. 1948, I had been fired at a university in Atlanta, Georgia, because I had defended a black woman and her two kids who had been sentenced to the electric chair because a white man had come to their home trying to rape the mother. The two kids defending their mother got the white man's gun and shot him. So all three of them were sentenced to the chair. So I went to a meeting. They asked me to come to a meeting in Atlanta there, where they were having a meeting to try to get it commuted to life. They wanted one white man, the black people that came to see me. And I did speak. I got fired from the university. My wife was fired. So I was out of a job. We had two kids. The Ku Klux Klan went out and burned their home on the river out on Chattahoochee. And then for 2 years I peddled vegetables in the streets of Atlanta. And then a preacher came, a head of a church, a moderator, called the Church of God of the Union Assembly. Now they were very, very, well, they spoke in the unknown tongue. They preached hellfire and damnation and all that kind of thing. But on the other hand, their national headquarters were in Dalton, Georgia. And this old moderator preached to his people that if you work in a cotton mill, if you work anywhere, and if there's a union in that plant, it's your Christian duty to join the union and help to build it. And if there isn't one, it's your Christian duty to try to build it, because he says the poor people, the only hope they have on this earth is unity, working together. So his church got in hot water, naturally. He asked me to come up and edit their national newspaper, which I did for 2 years. And I helped get him in hot water, I guess, because we printed a lot of stuff about the struggle of the cotton mill workers and the chenille. It was a bedspread center, and they were trying to get organized, and they did get some organization going. And it was that church had its credit cut off. It had a real hard time, but the old man stuck to it. He had been willing to be co-chairman with a black man of the Wallace Party in 1948 in Georgia. That is indicated. Now he was one of those kind of preachers. He was absolutely illiterate, but he was one of the most fantastic speakers you ever heard, and he was one of the most brilliant men I ever heard speak. He could sway a crowd like nobody's business, but he couldn't read. His wife would come in and read the scripture. He'd say, "Read, woman." She'd read. Then he'd expound on it. He finished that. He finished expounding on that. He'd say, "Read again, woman." She'd read. But you have that kind of thing, too, which is pretty down to
Okay.
earth.
We probably have time for
Go ahead. I want, go ahead.
one more question.
Sister Munoz. I'm with the auto workers in Detroit and helped organize there a support group for the Farm Labor Organizing Committee in Ohio. I'm convinced that in the long run, middle run, and even now, the interests of small and middle-sized farmers and of farm workers overlap. They have the same enemy, and the enmity is even stronger, perhaps between the small farmer and large corporations, because while the wage laborer on the farm is being brought into existence as a class, the small farmer is being extinguished. And yet there's tremendous difficulty in the Midwest and other places in establishing the practical and political consequences of that future alliance between small farmers and farm laborers. And I was wondering if at Muscatine you had been able to talk with farmers as well as farm workers, and whether you can see from those conversations and from what's happening in the fields any possibility for that alliance coming into being and overcoming the momentary antagonisms.
No, I think it's coming. For so long, we'd had such a struggle there between, well, struggle, hatred, whatever, between a grower and farm worker. And it was several years ago, we had almost a crisis in our area where we had an early frost, and well, we didn't have enough production of tomatoes, and the farm workers were not making enough money. So we had a crisis there where, the farm workers were really hurting. They didn't know how to return even back to Texas because they didn't make enough wages, and we were asking for money, donation, food, that type of thing to get them all settled and return to Texas. We ran into a lot of problems there with the growers. They didn't like us publicizing all this in the community. They thought that we should have referred to them first to help, to let them help us with money, et cetera. Well, they responded too, but it became a national response in the Midwest in particular. But out of that, we realized that we needed to dialogue more between the growers and the farm workers. And now on our board, we have a migrant board, we have grower representatives on our board, and it has been very productive and very helpful that we can communicate now about the conditions on the camps, about the canneries, why aren't they getting more money for their tonnage? And if they can get more money for their tonnage, maybe they can pay the farm worker better. And we had talked about organizing the growers and talking about asking more for tonnage from the cannery. That's still in just talk, but I think we're beginning to have more dialogue now, and hopefully maybe we'll form an alliance of some type.
I think that those of us who are of an advanced age, or whatever you want to call ourselves, it's important that people see photographically some of the things we talk about. The great curse of our TV culture and many of the young people that are growing up now is that they have never experienced, even in pictures, some of the things that we talk about today. The United Church of Christ has a way of infiltrating many organizations. The Joseph Duffy is the national chairman of the National Endowment for Humanities, is a UCC minister, the husband of Ann Wexler in the White House. But one of his good things that he did recently was to put out this marvelous series of photographs. It's called In Mine and Mill. The photographer is Earl Dotter, D-O-T-T-E-R. Now here's the mine. I have never seen such dramatic pictures in my life. I've been in a coal mine. I've worked around coal mines. Here is J.P. Stevens. Here you have a picture of somebody lying in a hospital bed with the distinction of having served 28 years with J.P. Stevens. A plaque, maybe got a gold watch too, I don't know, but dying of brown lung. Here's a picture of cotton pickers, only 2 of them, but these tell a very important story. And I think it's important to our children and to our peers that we have some understanding of the crisis of working people in this country. This year we're celebrating the anniversary of the Lawrence strike in Massachusetts, which was the beginning of the textile movement among workers in America. The Pilgrim Press is coming out with a new volume on the Lawrence strike. It has just published these photographs, which I have up here. It is also publishing the Business Day Reader. So there is some hope in the church. I'm very proud of my denomination. All of these things seem to converge at the same time. But I think it's important that people see graphically some of these things, that we encourage our young people to go out in high school and college and work with some of the groups we're talking about now. I think their whole life will be changed. I was in the Peace Corps during the early days of JFK. In the class of 1962, which is one of the best classes of the Peace Corps, 75% of the people who went into the Peace Corps in 1962 changed their life direction as far as professional aims go before they went in comparison with when they came out. Now, I have no illusions of grandeur that I'd experience of young people with working people, particularly those people from middle-class homes, will necessarily make believers. But the great barrier we have in American society is the barrier not so much of race, but of class combined with race. And unless people at an early age can understand the way other people live and have been in their homes and have accepted their hospitality and their graciousness and wept with them at a funeral, and understand what a person dying of brown lung means, then the American class structure is really in trouble. So I encourage you to